this recording, we're going to go over lines 102 to 123. And so, as you just remembered, that Aeneas has been met by name for the first time, and when we first meet him, he complains about the fact that he's going to die, drowning maybe, instead of diving heroically on the battlefield. So here we're going to see the effects of the winds and the description of the havoc that they are going to create. So, our subject here is the word prokella. Prokella is a storm, particularly a winter storm. Remember that in the ancient world, in the Mediterranean, the worst weather and storms occurs during the wintertime, whereas for us it is in the spring and summer due to the climate differences between the two. So, that storm, screeching with the aquilo wind. Remember that these winds are going to be named and personified. And that's the present active participle from streeto, streetere. And screeching to the one throwing, yakto, yaktare, a frequentative, and throwing such things. Now we've seen talia several times before, and if we take a look over here, in the third declension it is talis, talis, tale, and talia is nominative plural or accusative plural, and inevitably it's going to be substantive, so such things. Yaktanti refers to Aeneas, in that screeching to Aeneas, the one throwing about such things, and these such things that he's throwing about are these complaints and these bemoans of his situation. So that storm, screeching with the aquilo to the one throwing about such things, strikes or hits. This is ferio, ferire, instead of fero, fere. Then not the word to carry, but the word to hit. Strikes the sail, and it does so head-on facing. Adversa is modifying prokella, and it merely means literally like face-to-face. And so it strikes the sail dead on, not from the side, not from an angle, a direct hit, as it were. Que, and it lifts. We're still talking about the prokella here. And tolit is from tolo, tolere, which is a rather common word, and like fero, fere, it has a paradigmatic split, weirdness in its principal parts. Tolo, tolere, sustuli, and so you can see the tuli that it's related to, and sublatus. And it merely means to lift up, or it can also mean, ironically, to raze to the ground. R-A-Z-E, to completely destroy. But here lifts. And it lifts the fluctus, the waves, accusative plural, to the stars. Again, sidereal is the English word. The remi, the oars. A trireme is a three-oared ship. And so the remi are the oars themselves, the paddles. They are broken, frango, frangre. And then the prow, which is the front of the ship, it turns away, being away, huerto, huertere, and it gives its side, again latus, is going to come from, I suppose I'll just write it right here, latus and lateris. That's where we get the word lateral, or our muscles on the side are our lats. And it is a third declension, as you can see, lateris, neuter word. If a word is third declension and it has us, not an ending in the nominative, it is neuter. And so the nominative and the accusative look exactly the same, direct object. It gives its side to the waves, undis. So you have the word unda, undai, first declension, it means wave, and you have fructus, fructus, fourth declension. That's where we get the word fluctuate or undulate, which is what I'm doing now, or what you could describe waves in the ocean. A praeruptus, a ruptured, a sheared, a cut off, rupio, or rupo, rumpo, rumpare, rupui, ruptus, sheared off mountain of water, follows, sequor, sequi, secutisum, in a heap. And it's where obviously we get the word accumulation. He, now these are going to indicate the various ships, or the people on the ships. He, these guys, hic, haec, hoc. These guys hang, pendo or pendeo, pendere, and that is where we get the word depend. When you hang upon something, you depend. If it dangles down in your necklace, it can be a pendant. That's where we get the word pound, even comes from it. So these guys hang on the highest wave, and there you can see that fourth declension. And whereas that is nominative, indicating these who do the hanging, this is dative, so please make it a dative of reference. And for these guys over here, so these other guys, a wave splitting open, it appearit, that of course is a present active participle describing the wave, it opens up the land in between the waves. Now, to give you a very brief and quick idea as to what this is describing, if this then is a wave, well, let's see if I've drawn it poorly. There we go, that's more like it. And if they are so big, are these waves, again, drawn poorly, there it is, so the water is all in the mix like there, and the water is in the mix, is that if these waves are so huge, what inevitably might happen is being described is that essentially the water that would ordinarily in calm times be right here, because that water is shoved into these two waves, they are so big, so violent, so massive, that essentially the actual floor of the sea is revealed because of all the water being pushed up. And as we described it, you have these poor guys up there for whom that's no good. So you can see them riding it out up at the top. And then these poor guys, that's no good for them either, because obviously that wave is going to come crashing down on them. And so that is what we just, in that way, described. So again, these guys hang on the highest wave, which would be those guys that were up top, and for these other guys, the wave splitting open opens the land in between the wave. And the aistus, literally aistus, a fourth declension word, it means heat. But it can refer to as like the swell of the ocean or the tide of the ocean. And so the heat of the ocean, the swell, it rages, furio furire, with the sands. Often you see this word written without the H, and it's where we get the word arena or arena, if you would like. And so a violent, terrible storm is obviously raging for Aeneas and his men, and it's bad news all the way around in that they are definitely going to experience shipwrecks. So, now we go to the notus wind. Remember, that is the north wind. It's where the word north. The north wind hurls torqueo torquere. That's where we get the word torque. It hurls three, and it's implied three naves, three ships. Those ships having been snatched in saxa latentia. Now, saxa comes from the Latin word saxum, saxi, and it's where we get the English word saxifrage, a rock breaker. And so saxa, a rock. Latentia is present active participle from lateo latere, that means to hide. So the word latent, it's like latent heat in chemistry, or latent racism. You have overt racism, in which obviously you see the person being bigoted and the like, but latent racism is one you can't see necessarily, because it might be that I have a property for rent, and I turn away the black couple that wants to rent it because I'm racist, and then when I allow the white couple to rent, nobody knows that's by the racism, and so therefore that's where we get the word latent. It's hidden. And so the notus wind hurls three, having been snatched, and referring to ships, onto, it's accusative plural, the hiding rocks. That's what will get ships. You don't know that the rocks are there right below the surface. The Italians, the Itali, call the rocks, and what do they call these rocks? Arai, the altars, because that is where ships are sacrificed to the sea. And so, Italians call the rocks the altars, which imply are in the middle waves. And so a wonderful word picture here, in that those altars which, and then the word picture, they literally in the middle waves. So it's in the high seas. Normally you can tell that they're probably going to be rocks if it's near shoreline, but if you are actually out in the open sea and you don't know it, that's where, of course, you'll run into trouble, and that's why they call them the altars, because so often ships are going to be shipwrecked on it. Then we merely are describing what those altars are. And imane. Now, imane is, again, another example of third declension adjective, imanis, imane. So it's either nominative or accusative neuter. And so it is here a nominative modifying dorsum, which is the word for a back. But here in this context, it's like a reef. That's why we call it a dorsal fin. A huge reef in the highest sea. And so, again, the high seas is out in the open, and that's what we're talking about. Then we go to another wind. So we talked about what Notus did. Notus hurled them onto those altars, those rocks in the middle of the ocean, of the sea there. The Eurus, it urgets, urges, compels, forces, three, and again implied ships, three other ones, ab alto, from the deep, altusaum, into the shorts or shallows, if you would like, a neuter plural, and shoals. The Sirtes are the shoals. Now, miserabile visu. A miserable thing, implied neuter, because it's or just like we saw with imane, miserabilis, miserabilis, miserabile. Now, this is what we call a supine. There are two kinds of supines. Supines that end in um, and supines that end in u. When a supine, or what a supine is, it's a verbal noun. And so we've seen verbal nouns as expressed by infinitives, verbal nouns expressed by gerunds, and now we have the supine verbal noun. It will appear as a fourth principal part defective, either or u. Now, just like the infinitive is expressed to verb, that is how you can express the supine. It's to blank. But the supine, whenever we see it, is going to express purpose. So, let's say I wanted to go watch a movie. Let's say Empire Strikes Back. And somebody says, I am going to the theater. We zoom to see. And then we would have the movie. And so, when you see it with it looks like a perfect passive participle, but you don't see anything, necessarily, that it could be modifying. It could be the supine, the act of seeing. So, I am going to the movies, or I'm going to the theater, for the purpose of seeing something. The other is the supine ending in u, which is what we have here. That essentially acts like an ablative specification. Remember that the ablative specification works with an adjective to essentially tell you in what way the adjective is applicable. So in what way is this situation miserable? It's miserable in the act of seeing it. And so therefore, you could translate it idiomatically, a miserable thing to see. You also very often have, instead of miserabile, Virgil is fond of mirabile, miraculous. And then you could have miraculous visu, to see. You could have miraculous dictu, to say. I like when somebody says, can you believe I'm saying this? That would be the equivalency of mirabile dictu. So, a miserable thing to see, supine, showing specification. Quae, in lido in lidere, and it smashes those three, the trace, on the shallows. And so we had shoals, shallows, shallows, again, area where the water is not that deep. And it kingo, kingere, kinksi, kinctus. It's the word that means to surround. And it surrounds them with a mound, with an earthwork. That is what an ageris is, A-G-G-E-R. Do not confuse this with field, there are two G's. With a mound of sand. And so when it crashes out to these boats, due to the rough nature, it has moved around the sand, kind of like when you see a river after it has been raining heavily. It carries so much dirt and sand that the river becomes much more dark, and so it's no different. For example, whenever we talk about layers of rock in which you can find fossils, very often those layers, when they are thick, they represent like horrible hurricanes. And so in that way, the actual sediments are moved by these huge weather events, which of course is what we see here. Starting line 113, let me scroll. Alright, so here it is in the accusative. I need to go find a subject. Now I'm going to skip quae oratim, and now move along here. The reason being is that quae, vehebat, is its own clause. I need to find the subject and verb that is taking that as a direct object, and then I find it. The huge sea. This is the word pontus, that means sea, one of many words that we have. And so, the huge sea, here it actually refers to like a wave. So again, it's metonymy, one thing for the other. A huge wave from its peak, from its vertex, it strikes, it hits one, implied one ship, into its poop deck, an I stem. You see the I-M, accusative. And it does so in front of the eyes of himself. And this is referring to Aeneas. And it's a ship, unam, which was carrying veho, vehere, vexi, vectus. So we get the word vector and vehicle and so forth and so on. Which was carrying volitions and faithful Orontes. So this one, it strikes it down right on the top of the deck, the poop deck of the ship. And the captain, Magister's teacher, but it can also mean captain, is shaken about, is struck, cutio cutere, remember, that's where we get the percussion and concussion, is struck face down, pronus. He is rolled, vovore, passive, onto his head. Caput, capitis, a third declension, therefore the nominative and accusative are the same. But the fluctus in the nominative, the wave, hurls. Torqueo, torquere, you just had that. That one, referring to that ship, 3 times in the same place. This word ibidem, which means in the same place, is very often used in writing in footnotes and references. If you reference something in a footnote, and immediately you reference it again without any other intervening references of something else, you don't have to reference the working again. All you have to say is ibid, which means from the same place or in the same place. So a wave, but the wave hurls that one 3 times in the same place. We're describing a whirlwind, or a whirlpool, I should say. It agains, agare, that wave driving it around, and a rapid vertex, whirlpool, it warot. Like when you are voracious, you like to eat, it gobbles it up, it eats it in the sea. And so it's definitely sure that this one ship has been lost because it has been gobbled by the sea. It is sunk in the whirlpool. Rari nantes, rare, scattered, nantes, which are, of course, the swimming ones, no nare, so that means to swim. So rare swimming ones, scattered swimmers, you can make it substantized. They appear in the vast gurgling of the sea. That's what the gurges is. It's the sea, but I always like to translate it as gurgle. So in the vast gurgling, or gurgle, arms, weapons appear, and this is of course all of the wreckage of that ship. And it's the arms of men, once again, virum as a genitive plural for virorum, que, and planks, like from the ship, that also appears, and Trojan treasure, Troia Gaza, appears through the waves. And so the outcome of a shipwreck, you very often see all of the stuff that has been broken apart from the sea, and it's all there, of course, floating. And so your subjects here is that you see people who have survived it, some, scattered ones, not that many. The weapons appear, you see the floating spear, you see the floating shaft, and then the planks of the ship itself, and then finally all the junk that the Trojans had. So we're almost to our goal of 123. Scroll a little bit more. So in the outcome of this horrific storm, Yam walidim iloni nawim. Again, accusative, so we need to go find a subject, and that is it there. He aims. It is the winter or the winter storm. And now the winter storm has overcome, has conquered, winco, winkere, wiki, again, the second principal part, winkere, third principal part, wiki, to conquer. So now the winter storm has conquered the strong ship of Ilioneus, and now that storm has conquered, implied again, the ship of strong Achates. So if you were to translate it, the winter storm has conquered the strong ship, the valid ship of Ilioneus, and now of strong Achates. It's just implied of what we said before. And again, the winter storm has conquered the one, the ship, by, with, because of, from, in, on which a guy named Abbas, having been carried, again, weho, wehere, wexi, vectus, and the one on which grandivus. Now, ivus is the word for age. Grandus means great, so old aged, great aged, elates, and then implied having been carried. So 4 ships, absolutely crushed. The ship of Ilioneus, the ship of Achates, the ship on which Abbas, having been carried, and on which old-aged elates. Now, a word about ivus. As I said, it means age, but it can also mean like, not age as in I am 40 years old or 42, but age as in like a span of years. And you see it with the word medi. And that's why when you see something as medieval, or medieval, as we would say in English, it literally means the Middle Ages. So please remember that. Another word besides ius that you very often see that means age is aitos. And aitos, you get the word eternitas, which would be eternal age, or eternity if you would so like. Here it then says, all of them, referring to the ships, including the 4 that we have just described that the winter storm has conquered, all of them, all receive the inimicum embrim. Now embrim, it's rain, but here it's going to be referring to the water of the ocean. And it's hostile, unfriendly. All receive the hostile water, embrim. Because of from in the loose joints. That's what compagibus are. They're like the places to where the 2 planks meet of the sides. Remember latus, lateris, so that would be genitive plural. So all receive the hostile rainwater in the loose joints of its sides, and all split open, begin to split open. It is a inceptive. You can see fatiscunt. They split open, they begin splitting open. Rimai, it's the word for crack, and so therefore with cracks. So we can see that it is a terrible storm. Aeneas and his men have obviously been tossed around, and here we see the beginnings, starting in line 124, of how it all comes to an end. Neptune, because it's his territory, is going to get mad.